Hi everyone, and welcome to this week's Crime and Punishment story. This week I am covering the tragic case of Peter Dunagan and the murder of Agnes Dunagan, which took place in Newcastle Upon Tyne in 1883. And I would like to add that this was quite a difficult story to research. The name Dunagan may seem an easy name, but the news articles managed to spell it 4 or 5 different ways, making all of the information very hard to find, and I do feel that some of it is missing, but I hope you will still find it interesting. But before we begin, can I just say, if you do enjoy this video, then please give it a thumbs up. And if you are new here or haven't already done so, then do please consider subscribing to the channel to help support the content we create. Thank you. And I would just like to add, as I always do now, that I do record these stories live, so I do sometimes make mistakes, which I always try to rectify. So I hope this does not spoil your enjoyment of the video. There is sadly very little information about the past lives of those involved in this week's story, so the details will be quite basic. Peter Dunagan was born in Ireland in around 1831 and was said to be around 56 years old at the time the crime was committed. His parents are unknown. Described at the time as a small, thin man with grey hair and a clean-shaven face. He was said to be a labourer at the brickworks. However, it seems he had not been employed in this work for several months prior to the crime taking place. Agnes Dunagan was also born in around 1831 in Ireland, and her parents are also unknown. She was married to Peter, and the couple lived together in the Gallowgate area of Newcastle. It is not known if the couple had any children together. Agnes was not described by anyone as someone who was addicted to drink, but it was said that when she did drink, she would become very noisy and argumentative. At around 9 p.m. on the night of February the 3rd, 1883, Agnes Dunagan left her home in Gallowgate, Newcastle, and went off somewhere for a drink. It's not clear if she went to someone's house or if she went to the local public houses, and she had left her husband at home. She returned just before midnight, and knocking on the door, she asked her husband to let her in, but he refused. She went away for a few minutes before trying again, and this time her husband Peter let her in. The neighbours then heard sounds of an argument, and it did sound quite violent, and Agnes screamed a few times, and also there was something heard that sounded like someone falling to the ground. Things went quiet for a couple of minutes, and after this Agnes knocked on the door of her neighbour, Margaret MacDonald, and asked to be let in, but the neighbour refused, so she went back to her own room and went back inside, and the sounds of the argument were heard again, and then all went quiet. Not long after this, Peter went to the neighbour Margaret's door and knocked, asking her to come out, but she refused. He went back to his room, and he was heard pacing back and forward before returning and knocking again, but once more Margaret refused to come out or to let him in, and he was then heard to go downstairs. A few minutes after this, another neighbour, Mary Lovell, knocked on the door of Margaret MacDonald, and she asked her to come out at once, saying Agnes Dunagan was dead. The two women went to the room of Agnes and Peter, and on entering they found the floor was covered in blood, and Agnes was on the floor beside the bed. They knew at once that she was dead. After some persuasion, Peter went for a doctor, and the police were sent for. Peter called at the home of Dr. Young and told him that his wife was dead. Dr. Young went with Peter to their home and found Agnes on the floor. She had a cut to her throat, and it appeared that she had bled to death. Superintendent Anderson was called to the house on the night of the crime and searched the room. He found a razor wet with fresh blood in a box. He then arrested Peter on a charge of the willful murder of his wife Agnes, and he was taken to the police station. The inquest was held at the Cricketers' Arms in Gallowgate. No details were given as to who had identified the body of Agnes Dunagan. Margaret MacDonald said she lived in the same building in Gallowgate as the Dunagans. She lived with her brother Mark Burton. She said she had known the couple for around 8 years. She had seen Agnes on the afternoon of the 3rd of February at around 2 p.m. She said she was sober at this time. She said she did not see or hear anything else until around 9 p.m. when she heard someone leave the Dunagans' room, and she knew from the sound of the footsteps that this was Agnes, but she said she did not know where she went. At around 10 minutes to midnight, she heard Agnes knock on the door of her own room and say, "Peter, let me in." She said he replied saying, "I will not let you in. Go back where you have been." She said she could hear clearly as the walls between the rooms were very thin. She said Agnes went away, then returned a few minutes later. She knocked again and this time shouted, "Peter, let me in." He again said he would not, and Agnes said, "I have bought your master now." Now it's not clear what she meant by this, but Margaret said she had told Peter earlier that she would go for the police. Peter, she said, quickly opened the door and let Agnes inside. Almost immediately, Margaret said she heard the couple begin to argue. She heard sounds like someone being hit or kicked and the sound of someone falling against the joining wall. She said Agnes then came and knocked on her door, asking her to open it, but she said she told her she would not, and Agnes went away. Again she heard the sound of the couple fighting, and Agnes said, "Oh, Peter, lift me up," and he replied saying, "I will not lift you up, just lie there." Margaret said it all went quiet after this, but she believed she could hear Peter moving around the room. He then came out of the room and knocked on her door, saying, "Open the door, I want you," but she said she told him she would not open the door. He came again a few minutes later, and again she refused to open the door. She then heard him go downstairs, and shortly after this, another neighbour, Mary Lovell, knocked on her door asking her to get up. She said she told her that Agnes was dead. She said she went to the room with Mary, and inside they found Peter standing quietly next to the fireplace. The floor was covered in blood, and Agnes was lying on the floor next to the bed, with her head slumped forward. She told him, "Peter, you have kicked the poor woman to death," and he replied, saying that he had only kicked her with his bare foot. She said Peter then tried to pick Agnes up and make her stand, and she told him to leave her alone, saying, "You have caused plenty to her already, and I have seen enough now. I have seen the blood." She said her brother then came into the room and told Peter he would have to go for the police doctor, but Peter told him there was no need, he would go for his own doctor, and they both left to go and look for a doctor and a policeman. Peter was asked if he had anything to say to the witness, and he replied saying, "She says everything that is true, but I deny killing the woman." Mark Burton gave very similar evidence to Margaret, adding that he had spoken to Peter saying, "It is a bad job, Peter," to which he had replied, "I doubt that it is." He said he went to look for the police doctor, and Peter went to find Dr. Young. He said the couple often got drunk, and when they did, they would always argue. Mary Lovell said she also lived in the same building at Gallowgate as the Dunagans, and she said that around 2:45 a.m. on the morning of February the 4th, Peter had knocked on her door. He told her to come quickly as his wife had fallen down. She said she asked him what was wrong, and he said he believed his wife was very much hurt as she was losing a lot of blood, and that he would go for a doctor. She said she went to his room with him, and she said he went in first, and then he turned to her and said, "She is gone." Mary said she then told him, "Bless me, Peter, have you done that?" And he replied to her, "No, I have not put hands onto her." She said she then went to fetch Mrs. MacDonald, and after this her evidence was the same as Margaret MacDonald's. Dr. Young said in the early hours of Sunday morning Peter came to his house and told him that his wife had been bleeding and that she was dead. He said Peter's clothing was also stained with blood. He went with him to the house, and he knew at once that Agnes was dead. She had a large wound to her neck, and there was a lot of blood around the room. He said Peter told him he did not know if he had done this to his wife or not. He had been drinking, and he said he did not know what he was doing. He said Peter also told him that he had not eaten for days, so the drink had affected him badly. Superintendent Anderson said he was called to the house in the early hours of February the 4th. He found the body of Agnes slumped on the floor. Blood was all around the room and also on Peter's clothing. He said he searched the room and found a blood-stained razor in a box. The blood was very fresh. He arrested Peter on a charge of wilful murder and took him to the police station. On the way there, he said Peter asked, "Have you found the razor?" And he said he told him that he had, and that the doctor had also seen it. Peter then asked, "Was there blood on it?" And Superintendent Anderson said he told him that there was, and Peter said, "I put it on myself. I shaved myself with that razor today, and I cut my throat. That is how the blood got onto it." Superintendent Anderson said there were no signs of any cuts on the neck of Peter Dunagan. He said he spoke to Peter of the blood on his clothing, and he had replied saying, "That is not blood, it is paint." And he then simply said, "I am innocent." He made no further statements after this. Dr. Baumgartner said he was the police surgeon, and he had also been called to the home of the Dunagans on the morning of the 4th. He said he found Agnes slumped on the floor next to the bed. He said it had been he who had sent for the police, and after examining the body he found a large wound to her neck. It was believed that she had died due to blood loss. No details were given as to anything the coroner had said to the jury, but after retiring for only a short while, they returned a verdict of guilty of wilful murder, and Peter Dunagan was committed for trial and taken to Newcastle prison. I did not find any details of a funeral for Agnes Dunagan. I do not know if she had any family in the area, and no family was mentioned at the inquest. If not, then this may have been a case of a pauper's funeral, and I did not find any evidence of a headstone anywhere in the area for Agnes Dunagan. The trial took place in April of 1883 at the Moot Hall in Newcastle before Justice North. Peter Dunagan pleaded not guilty to the charge. As is often the case, the majority of the evidence at the trial was the same as that at the inquest, so I will only include the new information. A statement was made by the prosecution before the witnesses spoke, and in the statement it was suggested that Agnes had gone out on the night of the 3rd against Peter's wishes. It was suggested that he had asked her not to go, and when she did, he was angry with her, as this was the reason he had locked their door and had at first refused to allow her back inside. And when she did return, she was drunk and argumentative, and he was still angry with her, and this was why he had attacked her. And I'm sorry, I think I should have actually said that it was made by the defence, not the prosecution. James Welsh said he had seen Agnes and Peter at the marketplace in Newcastle at around 7 p.m. on February the 3rd. He said they seemed to be on friendly terms when he saw them. He had given Peter a loan of £half as he knew he was out of work and had no money. And he had known Peter for many years, and he felt he was a quiet, decent man. Alice Dixon said she had seen Agnes at around 10:30 p.m. on the night of February the 3rd. She did not say where exactly she had seen her, but she said she felt she was a little drunk at the time. She said she knew Agnes quite well, but she had never seen her the worse for drink. Margaret MacDonald stated that she had also never seen Agnes the worse for drink, except when her husband was drinking and had drove her to it. Then she had heard her come home drunk on many occasions. And she said she was a very noisy woman when she was drunk, and she said the couple always seemed to get on well when they were both sober. Rose Connor said she lived in a room in Gallowgate opposite the Dunagans. On the night of the 3rd of February, she said Agnes came to her room and sat with her for a while. She said this was just before midnight. She said Agnes had told her that Peter was a bad man and did not even give her the money to buy coal for the fire. She had told her to go back to her room and to be quiet and not argue with Peter. She said Agnes did go back to her own room just after this, and she heard the couple start to argue. She then heard Agnes scream. She glanced out towards their room and she saw Agnes on the floor. She said she did not go over to see what was wrong. P.C. Hall said he had also been called to the home of the Dunagans in the early hours of February the 4th. He said he had seen the blood around the room and had also seen the razor. It had fresh blood on the blade and near the handle. He He said he did not know if Peter had tried to hide the razor or if he had simply put it away without thinking, but it had been quite easy to find. Dr. Baumgartner said he had now performed the post-mortem on the body of Agnes Dunagan. She had 2 wounds to her throat. One he felt was superficial, nothing more than a scratch. The other, however, had cut through a vein, and it had been blood loss from this that had caused her death. He believed that had a doctor been sent for sooner, then the wounds to her neck would not have been fatal. Peter Dunagan did not give evidence on his own behalf, and I found little to no mention of how he came to attack Agnes with a razor. Most of the details given only spoke of him kicking her. And sadly I was also unable to find any details of the summing up for the prosecution, the defence or the judge's statement. It is quite rare, but sometimes complete details of the trials are never printed in the paper, and due to the various different spellings of the surname, this did make it difficult to find any full and comprehensive details of the trial. The jury, however, retired for only a short time before returning a verdict of guilty of wilful murder with a strong recommendation to mercy. The judge asked why they had asked for mercy, and the foreman said, provocation due to Agnes leaving the house and returning home drunk and quarrelsome. The judge then thanked them. As was the usual procedure, Peter was asked if he had anything to say as to why a sentence of death should not be passed upon him, to which he replied, "Not guilty of the crime, sir. I have nothing more to say." The judge then sentenced Peter Dunagan to death by hanging, and that his remains would be buried within the grounds of Newcastle Prison. He added that the recommendation of the jury would be passed to the Home Secretary for consideration without delay. Peter was then removed from the dock and taken back to Newcastle Prison. I did not find any evidence of a petition being arranged for Peter Dunagan. However, the judge did as he said he would and recommended Peter for mercy. And within a week, a letter was received from the Home Secretary stating that the sentence of death had been commuted to one of penal servitude for life. Later, Peter would be transferred to Dartmoor Prison, and the last information I could find for him was his listing there as a prisoner in 1891, when he was said to be around 62 years old. I did not find any details of his death. This was another strange story. It does seem that the couple were known drinkers, and that they did argue frequently, and the neighbours, as is often the case, seemed to be very used to hearing their arguments, and they also often seemed to be very unwilling to get involved in any way, and did not seem to take a lot of notice of the screaming and the sounds of falling. And it does seem sad that because of this, Margaret MacDonald was unwilling to allow Agnes into her room, and perhaps if she had done so, then Agnes may not have died. But I can also understand why she did not want to allow her into the room, as she may have been worried that Peter would have followed and that he would have turned his anger towards her as well. Why did Peter attack Agnes with a razor? Well, there doesn't seem to be any evidence about this at all. There seems to be no evidence to suggest that he had been drinking a lot, but he did feel that his lack of food had made the small amount of drink he had affect him more than it should have, and seemed to suggest that he did not know what he had done. So was this truly the case? Had he lashed out with the razor without realising that he would kill his wife? There was certainly no evidence given by anyone to say that they had heard Peter threaten to kill Agnes. Were the jury right to find him guilty of murder? Well, I do feel that they were, but I'm not sure that I agree with their reasons for mercy. It seems a little sad that they felt that Agnes going out and coming back drunk was enough to recommend mercy for the man who had killed her. And I am also not entirely convinced that his sentence should have been commuted. Many before him had been hanged, and some of those had had much more provocation or been convicted on purely circumstantial evidence. So I do feel that he was very lucky to escape with his life. But what do you think? Do you think Peter knew what he was doing when he attacked Agnes? Do you think it was correct that he was found guilty of murder? Or do you think that it was right that he was sent to prison for life? Or should he really have been hanged? Do let me know your thoughts in the comments below. I do hope that you have found this sad and tragic story interesting, and I do apologise for my mistakes again as always. And I do thank you all very much for watching, and I do hope to see you all again very soon.